Okay, so Elisa Lam, her disappearance from that Cecil Hotel, I mean, it's one of those cases that just gets under your skin, right? It sticks with you. And today we're going to try and really untangle it all. We've got articles, forum discussions, really anything we could find online, trying to figure out what's fact, what's fiction, the whole deal.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just your average true crime story, isn't it? I mean, the way this thing blew up online, it kind of says something about us, about how much we're all drawn to these kinds of mysteries. But I guess we should probably start with, like, the basics, who Elisa was and all that.
For sure, for sure. So Elisa Lam, she's a 21-year-old Canadian student. She gets to LA January 28th, 2013, and she had this whole itinerary planned out, like the classic California trip. San Diego, Santa Cruz, San Francisco, all the sunny spots. Instead, she ends up at the Cecil Hotel. And, well, that's a whole other story, a whole other vibe.
Hotel Death. I mean, come on, right? That nickname, you just can't make that up. This wasn't just some rundown hotel. It had, like, decades of bad stuff baked right into it.
Yes, suicides, accidental deaths. Heck, they even had a couple of serial killers stay there. Richard Ramirez, Jack Unterweger. I mean, that's not just bad luck at that point. It's like a pattern.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what the person who designed the place would think, seeing it turn into that.
It's really kind of fascinating in a dark way, right? Like,
yeah.
How a place can take on this almost like a bad energy, Whether you believe in that sort of thing or not, it definitely played a role in how people saw Elisa's case, the whole disappearance.
Absolutely. So, back to the timeline. She checked in January 20th. Shared room at first, but then they switched her to a private one. Last time her family talked to her, January 31st, everything seemed fine. Then February 1st rolls around, which was supposed to be, checkout day, and she's gone.
Poof. Vanished. And the weirdest part, all her stuff, still in the room. Passport, wallet, even her medication. It just doesn't add up right. If she just decided to take off, explore LA, why not take that stuff with her? That's one of those things that makes you stop and go, hold on, something's not right here.
Totally. It's like she didn't run away. Not really, because she left everything behind except, well, herself. And then there's that elevator footage, man. When that hit the internet, everybody turned into a detective trying to figure out what it all meant.
Oh, yeah, that footage. We got to talk about that. It wasn't just some blurry security camera thing. It's almost like artistic, like a silent film where we're all trying to read Elisa's mind through what she's doing.
Yeah, hitting all the buttons, popping in and out of the elevator, looking up and down the hallway. Some people even thought she was playing hide and seek with somebody, someone we couldn't see on the camera.
That's one theory that really took hold, didn't it? The whole invisible guest idea. But then you also have to factor in Elisa's bipolar disorder. Her family knew about it, and the autopsy later confirmed it. And manic episodes, well, those can cause some pretty erratic behavior, paranoia, even hallucinations,
So it could have been, what, a medical thing, a genuinely scary encounter with someone, or something else entirely. And then there's that detail about the elevator doors.
Not closing right while she's inside. Now, look, elevators are always messing up, right? But given everything else going on, it feels, symbolic. Like even the building was acting weird that day.
It's a scene straight out of a horror movie, for sure. The question is, are we seeing a glimpse into her own struggles, a dangerous situation she stumbled into, or just a bunch of really, really bad coincidences? Because after that footage, Elisa's just gone from the cameras, like poof.
Vanished.
Right.
And you got to think, this is a hotel in the middle of downtown LA, lots of people, cameras everywhere, and yet nothing. She just disappears.
So where do we go from here? We've got a young woman, gone without a trace, everything she brought with her left behind. And the last image we have is this weird elevator thing. So what's the next piece of this puzzle?
Well, this is where things take a pretty dark turn. See, it's not about missing person reports or her family searching anymore. Now it's about the guests at the Cecil Hotel and them complaining about the water.
Wait, hold on. Are you telling me those water complaints, they're connected to Elisa? This is not going where I think it's going, is it?
More than 2 weeks after Elisa vanishes, February 19th, a maintenance guy goes up to the roof to check the water tanks. Guests are saying the water pressure's low, it's discolored, tastes weird, and that's when they find it. Elisa's body inside one of the tanks.
Oh my God, no, how does someone end up in a water tank on a roof?
That is the million-dollar question, right? And that's what kicked off so many theories.
Yeah.
Those tanks were huge, the lids were heavy, and you're not supposed to be able to get up on the roof, especially if you're a guest. I mean, imagine someone wandering up there, sure, but then getting inside a tank. It just doesn't make sense.
It's like all the simple answers just fall apart, don't they? Even if you go with the official story, accidental drowning, it just raises more questions than it answers. The autopsy report, it says there was no foul play, but it doesn't explain how she even got up there.
Exactly. They didn't find any injuries on her body that would suggest a struggle or anything. No drugs, no alcohol. They did find her medication for bipolar disorder, though. So their conclusion was that maybe she had a manic episode, ended up on the roof somehow, and fell into the tank.
But if that's what happened, how did she get past the locked door to the roof? I mean, the autopsy didn't say anything about her suddenly developing superpowers or lock-picking skills, we'd say. And even if she did get up there, how did she manage to get inside a water tank? Those things have heavy lids.
And that's exactly the problem with the official story, isn't it? Those are the gaps that really fueled people's interest in the case, and let's be honest, their distrust too. The autopsy report tells us some things, sure, but it leaves out the biggest questions. It's like trying to put together a puzzle where half the pieces are missing.
Okay, so what really happened then? Did she just wander up there confused? Did someone put her there? Or is there something else going on here? Something we're just not seeing? It's like we're at a fork in the road. One path leads to the official story. But the other one, well, that one leads someplace a lot darker, a lot less certain.
And that's where things get really interesting. Because when there aren't clear answers, well, that's when we humans, we start filling in the blanks ourselves. We need a story, an explanation, and that's where all the theories come in. Each one is a way of trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense. I think we got to start with the one that's probably on everybody's mind, right? Murder. I mean, with a place like the Cecil, all its history, it's kind of the first thing you jump to. But does it really hold up?
Well, the autopsy, it said there were no signs of a struggle or anything, no injuries like that, and nobody saw anything suspicious either, at least not that we know of. You'd think if someone had hurt her, there'd be something, right, some kind of clue.
You'd think. But that's the thing about forensics, right? Just because you don't find evidence doesn't mean it wasn't there. Could be we just haven't found the right piece yet, or maybe it's gone, lost over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So even though there's no obvious signs, it doesn't completely rule out murder. It just adds another layer to this whole thing.
Exactly. And it's that lack of a clear answer that keeps the murder theory alive. You know, we humans, we like our stories to have endings, explanations. And a lot of times, a story about violence, someone doing something bad, that feels more complete than just a random accident or something we can't explain.
It's like we're always looking for someone to blame, even if there isn't anyone. But let's think about another big theory for a minute. What about suicide? I mean, Elisa having bipolar disorder, that adds a whole other dimension to it.
That's a tough one. And it's important to remember mental health, it's a really personal thing, often something you can't see from the outside. So yeah, Lisa had bipolar disorder, but we can't just assume that's what led to her death, you know?
Yeah.
And the way it supposedly happened, ending up in a water tank on the roof, it's just not something you usually see with suicide.
It seems almost impossible to pull off doing something like that alone. And then there's her stuff. If you're going to end your own life, why leave everything behind? You'd think maybe you'd take something personal, leave a note, something like that, right?
Right. And that's one of the things that just doesn't fit with the suicide theory. It's like she just vanished from her room, leaving no trace except for that weird elevator video.
Which brings us right back to where we started. If it wasn't murder and it wasn't suicide, then what was it? There was that theory about an accidental overdose too, especially since she was on medication. But the toxicology report, that kind of shut that down, didn't it?
It did. No drugs, no alcohol in her system. And the amount of her medication, it wasn't enough to be considered fatal. So overdoses might seem like a possibility at first, but the evidence just isn't there.
So we've ruled out the most obvious explanations. Murder, suicide, overdose. But we still don't have an answer. It's like the more we learn, the less we actually know.
That's what's so strange about this whole case, isn't it? It's a puzzle where every piece we try to fit in just creates more holes, more questions.
But there's one more theory we haven't talked about yet, and it's a little bit, well, out there.
Oh, you mean the connection to that movie Dark Water? I remember when people started talking about that, it gave me chills, man. Too many similarities to just be a coincidence.
Okay, so let's break it down. In the movie, a little girl, her body's found in a water tank on a roof. Sounds familiar, right? And the movie's also got these themes of like dark pasts, creepy stuff happening, a feeling that something's just not right. All of that kind of fits with the Cecil Hotel, you know? Its history, the whole vibe around Elisa's disappearance. I mean, sure, it's a horror movie, so it's supposed to be creepy. But the parallels are definitely there. So are we saying Elisa's death was inspired by the movie? Like life imitating art?
Nah, it's not about saying the movie caused anything directly.
Yeah.
Or that Elisa was trying to copy it. It's more about, like, noticing the weird coincidence. It's like reality took a page out of that movie script, and now we can't tell what's real and what's not.
And that's part of why this whole thing is so unsettling, right? Our brains are trying to make sense of it, trying to separate the real from the made up. We want an explanation, but sometimes things just happen, and there's no neat little box to put them in.
You got it. The dark water thing, even though there's no evidence to prove anything, it just makes the case even more complicated. It makes us think about coincidence, about how powerful stories can be, and it shows how we humans, we're always looking for patterns, for meaning, even when things are totally random and tragic.
Yeah, our brains are wired to make connections, even if they're not really there. We see faces in the clouds, hear secret messages in songs, and sometimes we see real life lining up with something we saw in a movie. We're always trying to find meaning, trying to make sense of a world that can feel pretty crazy and unpredictable.
And with Elisa Lam, that need to find meaning is even stronger because we don't have any real answers. There's just this empty space, and that's where our imaginations go wild, connecting the dots, making up stories, looking for clues in all the wrong places, even in a horror movie that came out years before.
It shows how powerful mystery can be, how it can grab hold of everyone's attention. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole with all these theories, let's take a step back. Why did this case, out of all the unsolved mysteries out there, why did this one blow up the way it did? What was it about Elisa's story that made it stick with people?
That's the real question, isn't it? And that's what makes this case so interesting. It's not just about the facts, the evidence, or even the theories. It's about how Elisa's story hit us, deep down. How it connected to our fears, our fascination with things we can't explain, our need to figure out a world that can seem so unfair, so random.
It's like her story became this reflection of our own worries, about safety, privacy, about how easily things can go wrong, especially online. But that's a whole other conversation. I think we need a minute to process all of this. Let it sink in before we get to the final part of our deep dive. So we've talked about the theories, the evidence, well, the lack of evidence, really. We even touched on that dark water connection, which honestly is still kind of freaking me out. But the bigger question is, why did this case, out of all the others, why did this one become such a huge deal?
It's almost like a bunch of different things came together at the right time. First, you've got Elisa herself, young woman, traveling on her own, sharing her trip online. I mean, that's something a lot of people can relate to, especially these days with everyone on social media.
Right. It makes her more than just a name in a news story. You know what I mean?
Right.
Through her blog, we get to see little pieces of who she was, what she wanted out of life, her worries. It's like it makes it all so much sadder because you can almost imagine yourself in her place.
And then there's the Cecil Hotel. Not just any hotel, but that hotel. It already had this reputation, like a place where bad things happen. It's not just a background. It's almost like another character in the story.
It's like it represents that feeling you get in a big city, that even with all these people around, you can still just disappear.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of all that, you've got that elevator footage. Yeah. Grainy, no sound, but you can't stop watching it.
Yeah.
It's like this piece of evidence that's both fascinating and totally frustrating at the same time.
People watched it over and over, trying to figure out what she was doing, trying to find meaning in every little thing, every button she pressed, every time she looked down the hall. It's like we were all trying to finish the story that the video couldn't tell us.
It taps into that part of us that wants to solve puzzles, to make sense of things that seem random. And because it's from a security camera, it feels more real, more raw, like we're seeing something we're not supposed to see.
It's like those scenes you see in movies, right? So it almost feels like we're watching a thriller play out in real life. But it's not just the video. Remember, Elisa disappeared in 2013. That's when social media was really starting to take off.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This case didn't just get reported on. It got, blown up online. People talked about it, argued about it, came up with theories, all happening in real time, all over the world.
It's like the whole internet became this massive brain trying to figure out what happened to her. And even though there was a lot of crazy stuff out there, it kept her story alive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it meant that Elisa Lam wouldn't just become another missing person, another cold case. And in a weird way, I think it shows how powerful online communities can be, even though they can be messy and full of drama sometimes.
They can give a voice to people who don't have one, shine a light on things that might have gotten swept under the rug. But it also shows how much we need to understand things, to find order in all the chaos.
Especially when the official story doesn't make sense or leaves us with even more questions. We try to fill in the blanks ourselves. We come up with our own stories, our own ways of seeing things. We just want to find some kind of closure, even if it's impossible.
So the Elisa Lam case, it's not just about someone vanishing. It's about true crime, about how technology changes things, and about what makes us tick as humans. It's about how we deal with loss, how we try to find meaning, and how we deal with a world that can be amazing one minute and terrifying the next.
And even though the Cecil Hotel is closed now, even though it's been years, Elisa's story, it's still with us. It reminds us that some mysteries, we might never solve them. But that search for answers that need to understand, that's part of what makes us human.
That's a good place to end things, I think. This case is a real head-scratcher, full of twists and turns. But hopefully this deep dive gave you some new things to think about as you try to unravel the mystery of Elisa Lam.
And to you, listening out there, we leave you with this. What part of this case sticks with you? What keeps you coming back to it? Because the answers, just like the mystery itself, they're personal. They're yours.